we might ask about some other aspects of Professor Gale's perspective that also might bear on the presentations of Quentin Smith and William Craig. Professor Gale indicated that he thought that the rise of modern science indicated that we had a new reason, in effect, for disbelieving certain common sense notions, like contracausal or libertarian free will. Would any of the panelists like to speak to that or to related issues? For example, I believe Craig accused Smith of making motion impossible.
Well, the answer to that is that Bill Craig omitted to mention that there's a cause of motion, and the cause of motion is not the state of rest, and therefore the cause of the motion begins the motion, and the beginning state of the motion is a first instant, and therefore the motion is not half open in the direction in which William Craig suggested. So what he omitted the fact is that he gave an example of interworldly things, and they all have causes, and the operation of the cause is on a first instance. So there's no analogy between that and the origin of the Big Bang. And as pertaining to naturalism and evolution, I think analogous argument that I gave regarding the very early universe could be given to evolution. That in every state of the universe, including all the organisms in it, from the early symmetry breaking phases, where all the masses and forces acquired their values, right up to the formation of DNA and the first bacteria, each instantaneous state of the universe is caused by earlier states of the universe. And this happened from bacteria all the way up to Homo sapiens sapiens, which is our species. And therefore, there is a natural causal chain that explains it and leaves no room for God to cause anything. And what this shows by natural causal chain, I mean to say that naturalism is a part of science. It's not something added to science as something called methodological naturalism, or a supplementary premise like metaphysical naturalism. Naturalism is science, in addition to, of course, the equations and interpretation of equations and so on. I think there's another argument for God's non-existence that is rarely mentioned, but I think is very powerful, is that the sciences of neurophysiology and psychology have all agreed that there is a law of nature that for anything to be conscious, it has to have a brain. And so it's impossible for something to be conscious without a brain. And if one says, well, it is possible for something like God to be conscious without a brain, then one is confusing a law of nature with an accidental generalization, which would be like all pieces of gold are less than half a mile in diameter. But the law of nature is that it's necessary to be conscious that you have to have a working brain with a certain EEG reading and so on. And so it's not possible for there to be an exception to that law. And that law is taken as being metaphysically necessary. And therefore, it's metaphysically impossible for God to exist.
Okay. Let's, since you're making several different arguments, let's try to keep one at a time to make conversation easier. Would you like to respond, Dr. Craig?
Well, Quentin, that can't be right, what you said about motion. If an object is at rest, like my hand, and it moves then, I move my hand, and motion is continuous, there cannot be a first instant of motion, because then there would be a discontinuity between the state of rest and the first instant of motion. So there isn't a first instant at which a thing begins to move, right? It just is, as you say, a half-open interval that goes right back to the state of rest, which is the limit point, but there isn't any.
Oh, what I was talking about
was
what causes the motion.
Yeah, well, say I'm the cause of the motion
right,
of my
and what
hand.
causes the motion, the efficacy of that cause, what it operates on, is the last instant of the object remaining at rest, and that is the first instant of the object moving.
That's impossible, because then it would be at rest and in motion simultaneously.
No, because the cause acts on the instantaneous state of rest, and the action of the cause brings about a posterior effect, posterior effect in conformity with the tradition that effects are always later than their causes.
Okay, I don't want to belabor this, but it seems to me you could have a parallel analogy with God and the beginning of the universe, that God acts at the point of eternity, and the universe then begins to exist, but has no first instant of its existence,
I have no
just
idea.
in the same way that motion,
So I have no idea what
Can-
point of eternity means.
well, it would be analogous to the point of rest.
Well, I still don't understand what that could mean.
Well, it would be, say, God's state of timelessness.
How is that a point?
Well, it is a point in the sense that it is a location, temporal, or, well, it wouldn't
Is
be a
temporal
temporal
location
location.
in timelessness?
It wouldn't be a temporal location, but it would be the state in which God exists, and it would be analogous, I think, to a state of rest, where there is no motion, there is no time.
Well, a state of rest is a physical state of a spatial object in space. And if God is timeless and spaceless, then it makes no sense to say that God is at rest.
Right, I wasn't saying that.
Oh, and it has no analogy
Well-
has no analogy to anything that would make sense either, if I might say
All
so.
right. Well,
Well, we seem to have some disagreement over the causal properties. Go ahead.
I've got,
I'd like to raise an objection to Quentin Smith's claim that if you explain the existence of each and every member of an aggregate, you thereby explain the existence of the entire aggregate. That's David Hume's principle. So if for each contingent being in the universe, you can explain its existence in terms of some other contingent being, you thereby have explained the existence of the entire aggregate of contingent beings, even if there's an infinite number of them. Here's a nice counterexample. An automobile is an aggregate comprised of different parts, pistons, carburetor, and so on. Now, for each of these parts, you could have an explanation for its existence, and not thereby explain the existence of the entire car. So here's a more subtle point. Even though X is identical with Y, he said the aggregate's identical with the collection of its parts, it wouldn't follow that an explanation of X is an explanation of Y. It's because explains creates what's called a non-extensional context, in which if you substitute one expression for another expression referring to the same thing, you could alter the explanation so it no longer is a good one. For example, we can explain the fact that there was a run on the bank by the fact that the president of the bank was found to be a dishonest, immoral man. Now, let's imagine the president of the bank is identical with the only man in Sludge Falls that has 400 hairs on his head. But you don't explain the fact that there was a run in the bank by the fact that the only man in Sludge Falls with 400 hairs on his head was found to be an immoral man.
I think it's great that we've got these guys, going against each other now. Bill Craig and I are going, we're going to stick together.
Want me to
but-
respond to that? Well, I think that there,
you can be
Well, I've got-
guaranteed I'm not going to go against you, Al.
But I've